"Can you hold her just until she sleeps?" the Duke begged. The words were a ragged prayer in the suffocating quiet of the room, stripped of all rank and privilege. They were the plea of a man utterly broken, directed at a woman he had shattered 7 years prior. Genevieve, who now called herself Jane Smith, did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the small, feverish child thrashing in the narrow bed. Her daughter. His daughter. The daughter he had never known existed until 3 days ago. Her hands, chapped from lye soap and coarse linen, smoothed the damp hair from Rose's forehead. The gesture was automatic, a rhythm she had perfected over 2,555 nights of motherhood. 7 years. It felt like a lifetime. It was a lifetime. The life of the Duchess of Blackwood had ended in a storm of whispered accusations and cold public dismissal. The life of Jane Smith, maid of all work at the Gilded Finch Inn, had begun in the mud and rain of a nameless road, with nothing but a handful of sovereigns and a burgeoning secret tucked beneath her heart. The man standing in the doorway, Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, was a ghost from that other life. He looked older, the sharp, handsome lines of his face carved deeper by something that looked like regret. His immaculate coat was rumpled. His eyes, the same piercing Beaumont grey that she saw every day in her daughter's face, were hollowed out with exhaustion and a helpless despair she had never imagined he could feel. "Please," he said again, his voice cracking, "I do not know what to do. She will not settle." Genevieve's own exhaustion was a physical weight, a cloak of lead she had been wearing for 3 days. Since his arrival in the quiet village of Oakhaven, a cataclysm in a gentleman's travelling clothes, the fragile peace she had built had been obliterated. The confrontation, the bitter accusations, the shock of his revelations about a conspiracy she had never suspected, it had all culminated in this. Rose, sensitive to the violent shift in her mother's world, had succumbed to a fever that burned through her small body. And Alistair, the man who commanded thousands of acres and hundreds of souls, could not command a sick child to sleep. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. She finally turned her head, her eyes sweeping over him with a coldness that had been forged in the icy chill of abandonment. "You are her father," she stated, her voice flat. "You learn, just as I did." The word struck him like a physical blow. He flinched, his broad shoulders slumping. "She is afraid of me, Genevieve. I am a stranger to her." Hearing her own name from his lips was a shock. For 7 years, she had been Jane. Jane, who scrubbed floors and changed sheets and knew the precise way to soothe a colicky baby. Genevieve was a phantom, a creature of silk and sapphires who had died that night. "She is sick," Genevieve corrected, her voice softening almost imperceptibly as she looked back at Rose. "She needs her mother." She slid onto the edge of the cot, her body a familiar comfort against her daughter's. She began to hum, a low, tuneless melody that had been their nightly ritual since Rose was born. The child's restless movements began to still, her small body instinctively curling toward the source of comfort. Alistair watched from the doorway, a silent, wretched statue. He was witnessing a world he had no part in, a sacred bond he had forfeited. The room was small and plain, smelling of chamomile and damp wool. The furniture was simple, scarred wood. It was a universe away from the cavernous, silent nurseries of Blackwood Manor, the home he had banished her from. The story had started there, in those opulent, suffocating rooms. He had been married to Genevieve for a year, a suitable match arranged to unite two powerful families. She was beautiful, quiet, and seemed as fragile as spun glass. His formidable aunt, Lady Eleanor, had impressed upon him the need to manage Genevieve's delicate constitution, her nervous sensibilities. He, a man uncomfortable with overt emotion, had readily agreed. It was easier to keep his wife at a genteel distance, to bury himself in the administration of his vast estates and leave her social and domestic life to his capable aunt. He had believed he was being a responsible husband, protective even. He had been a fool, an arrogant, blind fool. The memory of that final night was a brand on his soul. A dinner party, the grand dining room glittering with crystal and silver. Lady Eleanor, her face a mask of sorrowful duty, presenting him with a packet of letters. Letters supposedly written by Genevieve to a secret lover, filled with passionate declarations and cruel mockery of her own husband. The handwriting was a passable imitation of her delicate script. He had not questioned it. It had confirmed every whispered suspicion his aunt had planted over the months. Genevieve's quietness was not serenity, but deceit. Her fatigue was not illness, but a symptom of her secret life. He remembered the silence that fell as he'd confronted her in front of their guests. He remembered the look on her face, It was not guilt, it was not fear, it was a profound, chilling stillness, as if a statue had come to life only to be turned back to stone. Her blue eyes, usually so soft, had become chips of ice. "I see," was all she had said. She had not defended herself, she had not wept or pleaded. She had simply turned and walked from the room. He had expected hysterics in the morning, a tearful confession. Instead, he had found an empty bed. On the pillow, gleaming against the white linen, lay the Blackwood sapphires, the priceless necklace worn by the duchesses of his line for 200 years. A silent, damning abdication. She had vanished. He had told the world she had retired to a private sanatorium in the countryside to recover her nerves. It was a lie that had grown heavier with each passing year. Lady Eleanor had been triumphant, taking her place as the true mistress of Blackwood Manor, but the house had grown quieter, colder. The victory was ashes in his mouth. The first year was a blur of anger and wounded pride. The second, a slow, seeping unease. By the fifth, the unease had curdled into a deep, abiding suspicion. Eleanor's constant presence, once a comfort, began to feel like a jailer's. A careless word she let slip about the forger she had once used for a land document. A servant's frightened glance, a memory of Genevieve's unwavering honesty in all other things. It was a tapestry of doubt that slowly, painstakingly unraveled. He hired a discreet solicitor, a man named Davies, who was known for his tenacity. The investigation took 2 years. 2 years of unearthing a web of lies so intricate and malicious it took Alistair's breath away. Paid servants, a compromised doctor who had been supplying Genevieve with tonics to keep her perpetually drowsy and confused. And finally, the testimony of a handwriting expert who declared the love letters to be clever but undeniable forgeries. The truth had not set him free. It had imprisoned him in a new hell of his own making. The knowledge that he had not just been deceived, but that he had been the willing instrument of his own wife's destruction, was a torment beyond anything he had ever known. Davies's final report had located her. A maid calling herself Jane Smith in a remote village on the Welsh border. The report had made no mention of a child, so he had come here, to Oakhaven, to this simple inn. He had walked in and seen her, her sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She was thinner, and the fine, delicate beauty had been weathered into a different kind of strength. The fragility was gone, replaced by a formidable competence. When her eyes had met his, there was no recognition at first. Then a wave of shock, followed by a look of such profound loathing it had staggered him. And then a little girl with his eyes had run into the room, calling for her mama. The world had tilted on its axis. A daughter, his daughter, a living, breathing testament to the 7 years he had lost, the life she had been forced to build from the rubble of the one he had destroyed. Now, in the dim light of the sick room, Rose finally settled into a deep, even sleep, her small hand clutching a fold of her mother's worn dress. Genevieve did not move. She sat as still as a sentinel, her entire being focused on the child. Alistair cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet. "I will have my man fetch a physician from Shrewsbury, the best one." "No," she said, not looking at him. "We have Dr. Evans in the village. He is a good man. He delivered her. He knows her." Every word was a small stone building the wall between them higher. We, us, a world he was not part of. "Genevieve, he started, his voice thick with the 1,000 things he needed to say. "I am sorry. I was a fool. I was cruel. Forgive me." The words clogged in his throat, inadequate and obscene in the face of her 7 years of hardship. She finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You should go back to your room, Your Grace. There is nothing for you to do here." The title was a slap. He was not Alistair to her. He was a rank, a position, a stranger. He nodded, defeated. He retreated from the doorway, the quiet click of his own door closing down the hall sounding like a final judgment. He sank into a hard, unforgiving chair in his own room, the best the inn had to offer, which was still leagues below the meanest servants' quarters at Blackwood. He stared into the darkness. The image of Genevieve and Rose burned into his mind. He had come here with a vague plan of explanation, of apology, of restoration. He had imagined sweeping her and their child back to Blackwood, righting the wrong, and resuming their lives. How breathtakingly arrogant he had been. He saw that now. He could not erase 7 years. He could not restore the woman she had been. He had come to reclaim his duchess, only to find a stranger named Jane Smith who wanted nothing from him, a woman who had survived, even thrived, without him. a mother who was a fierce and capable protector. He had lost his wife. He had lost 7 years of his daughter's life, and as he sat there in the dark, a terrifying thought took root in his soul. He had not just come here to give an apology. He had come here to earn a life, and he had no idea how to even begin. The next morning, the fever had not broken. Dr. Evans, a kindly man with gentle hands and worried eyes, confirmed it was a severe inflammation of the lungs. He left powders and instructions, his gaze lingering on Alistair with open curiosity. The entire village was buzzing with the arrival of the Duke and his carriage. Genevieve was a pale wraith, her face taut with worry. She had not slept. Alistair found her in the inn's kitchen, crushing herbs with a mortar and pestle. The air was thick with the sharp, clean scent of eucalyptus and mint. "Let me do that," he said, his voice rough from a sleepless night. She did not even look up. "I know the right consistency." He stood there useless. A duke in a kitchen, watching his wife, a maid, prepare a poultice for their sick daughter. The absurdity of it was a physical weight. He saw her hands, red and raw at the knuckles, but her movements were deft and sure. He remembered those hands arranging flowers, holding a book of poetry, resting lightly on his arm. They seemed to belong to a different person. "Davies will be here this afternoon," he said quietly. "He has the documents, the forger's confession, the statement from the footman your aunt paid to lie, everything." She paused, the pestle stilling in her hand. For a moment he saw a flicker of the old Genevieve, a shadow of vulnerability in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it is the truth," he said, taking a hesitant step closer. "It is the truth I should have seen 7 years ago. I was blinded by pride, and by my aunt's poison. It is no excuse, but it is the truth." She resumed her grinding, the rhythmic scrape of stone against stone filling the silence. "The truth does not give me back 7 years, Your Grace. It does not give my daughter a father for the years she had none. Your truth is a matter for your own conscience. It has nothing to do with us anymore." He felt the chasm between them widen into an impassable gorge. She had built a fortress around herself and her daughter, and the truth was not the key to its gates. He left the kitchen and went outside. The air in Oakhaven was different from the manicured grounds of his home. It smelled of wood smoke, damp earth, and livestock. It was the smell of real life, of work and survival. He saw the innkeeper's husband, Mr. Gable, splitting logs for the fire. The axe rose and fell with a satisfying thud. Without a word, Alistair took off his fine woolen coat, folded it carefully over a fence post, and rolled up the sleeves of his pristine linen shirt. He walked over to the woodpile. Mr. Gable stopped, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Your Grace?" "Show me how to do that properly," Alistair said, his voice firm, "before I take my own foot off." For the rest of the morning, the Duke of Blackwood chopped wood. It was clumsy, awkward work at first. His hands, accustomed to holding a pen or the reins of a thoroughbred, blistered quickly. His back ached. The muscles in his shoulders screamed in protest, but he did not stop. With every swing of the axe, he channeled his frustration, his regret, his impotent rage at himself. He worked until his shirt was soaked with sweat and his hands were raw. He worked until he was too exhausted to think. He was piling the split logs by the kitchen door when Genevieve came out. She stopped, her eyes taking in his disheveled state, the sweat on his brow, the pile of wood at his feet. She said nothing. She simply filled a bucket of water from the pump and went back inside. But he saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes, a crack in her icy composure. It was not admiration. It was not forgiveness. It was simply notice. For the first time, she was seeing him as something other than the monster from her past. That afternoon, Mr. Davies arrived. He was a small, precise man, and he laid out his findings in the inn's private parlor with quiet efficiency. He had sworn affidavits, bank records showing payments from Lady Eleanor to the doctor and 2 former servants, and the damning analysis of the forged letters. Alistair made Genevieve sit and listen. She did so with a reluctant, stony patience, her arms crossed over her chest. As Davies spoke, her expression remained unchanged, but Alistair saw the tight clenching of her jaw, the way her knuckles turned white. She was hearing, in cold legal detail, the architecture of her own ruin. When Davies was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "My aunt will be dealt with," Alistair said, his voice a low growl. "She will be removed from Blackwood. She will be financially cut off. She will have no power to ever harm anyone again." Genevieve gave a short, mirthless laugh. "You will send her away, just as you sent me away. How fitting." "It is not the same," he insisted. "She is guilty. You were innocent." And that was a distinction you were unable to make, she countered, her voice dangerously soft. You, my husband, you looked at me and you saw a whore and a liar. Do you truly expect this? She gestured to the papers on the table. To make that disappear? No, he said, his own voice raw. I expect nothing. I am simply giving you the truth you are owed. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floorboards. I am going back to my daughter. She walked to the door, then paused, her back to him. The wood you chopped, the kitchen fire was low. It was useful. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Alistair sank into a chair, the solicitor's evidence seeming flimsy and pathetic. He had proven her innocence, but he had also proven his own unforgivable guilt. The fact that his labor had been deemed useful felt like a greater victory than all of Davis's carefully gathered facts. It was the first, smallest indication that there was a currency in this new world he might be able to earn. The currency of deeds, not titles. For the next week, Alistair lived in a state of self-imposed penance. He sent his valet and his fine carriage away, keeping only one trusted man and a horse. He took his meals in the common room of the inn, enduring the stares and whispers of the local patrons. He spent his days performing any task Mr. Gable would give him. He mended a broken fence, cleared a blocked ditch, and helped unload barrels of ale from the drayman's wagon. His hands, once soft, became calloused. His body, accustomed to the gentlemanly pursuits of riding and shooting, became hardened by real labor. He did it all within sight of the window to the small room where Genevieve kept her vigil. He wanted her to see, not to impress her, but to show her he was not the same man who had sat in a drawing room and passed judgment. He was a man willing to dirty his hands, to feel the ache of honest work, to be humbled. He saw her only in passing, a glimpse of her face at the window, a brief moment when she came to the kitchen for a tray. She never spoke to him, but he felt her eyes on him, watching, waiting. He did not try to see Rose. He knew he had no right, but he asked Mrs. Gable, the kind innkeeper's wife, about her every morning. The fever is stubborn, Your Grace, the woman would say, her expression a mixture of pity and disapproval. But her mother is a lioness. She will not lose that cub. One evening, after a long day of clearing stones from a field that the Gables wanted to plant, he was walking back to the inn, his whole body protesting. He saw a light in the small workshop behind the main building. Curious, he peered through the grimy window. Genevieve was inside. She was not nursing her child, she was carving. In her hands was a small block of wood and a sharp knife. On the workbench beside her were a dozen or so small, exquisitely carved wooden birds. She was concentrating with a fierce intensity, her tongue caught between her teeth. He watched, mesmerized. This was a skill he never knew she possessed, a secret talent from a secret life. He remembered her telling him once, in the early days of their marriage, that her grandfather had taught her to whittle. He had dismissed it as a quaint, unladylike hobby. Now he saw it for what it was, a solace, an art, a way to create something beautiful out of the simple and the discarded. He saw Rose's favorite toy, a small wooden robin, sitting on the bench. She clutched it every night. Genevieve had made it for her. She had filled her daughter's life with love and handmade beauty, even in their poverty. A wave of shame so profound it made him dizzy, washed over him. He had given her jewels, cold and heavy symbols of ownership. She had given their daughter life and love and art carved from her own hands. He backed away from the window, retreating into the shadows. He finally understood. He could not win her back with grand gestures or by proving his case. He could only hope to show her, through the slow, steady accumulation of small, humble actions, that he was a man worthy of standing in the same room as her. A man worthy of being a father to the girl who slept with a wooden bird in her hand. The fever broke on the 10th day. Alistair heard the news from a beaming Mrs. Gable. She's awake and she asked for broth, the woman declared. Jane, the Duchess. She's finally asleep in the chair beside the bed. First real sleep she's had since this all began. Relief washed through him, so potent it left him weak. He wanted to race up the stairs to see them both, but he held himself back. His presence was a disruption, a source of turmoil. The best thing he could do for them was to remain at a distance. He spent the day working with a renewed vigor, his heart lighter than it had been in years. In the late afternoon, he was returning to the inn when he saw Genevieve outside, walking slowly in the small patch of garden behind the building. She looked pale and thin, but the taut line of worry around her mouth had eased. He stopped, his heart pounding. It was the first time they had been truly alone together since the confrontation. She looked up and saw him. She did not retreat. She simply watched him approach, her expression guarded. "Mrs. Gable told me Rose is better," he said, his voice quiet. "Yes," she replied. "She is weak, but the fever is gone." He stood before her, his dirty work clothes a stark contrast to her simple but clean dress. He twisted the worn handle of the shovel in his hands. "I am glad." An awkward silence fell between them. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth and the distant bleating of sheep. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice not unkind, but genuinely curious. "You have proven your point. Your aunt is a villain. I was wronged. You can go back to your life now." "This is my life," he said, the words coming out with a force that surprised him. He looked from her face to the inn, then back again. "My daughter is in that building. My wife is standing in front of me. Everything that matters in my world is in this small, muddy corner of the country. Where else would I go?" Her breath hitched. It was the closest he had come to a declaration of love, and it was tangled up in work and dirt and regret. "I am not your wife," she whispered, but the words lacked their previous conviction. "I am Jane Smith, a maid." "You are the mother of my child," he countered, taking a step closer. He was intensely aware of the space between them, a gulf of 7 years. "You are the woman I failed. I cannot undo that. God knows I have spent every waking moment of the past 2 years wishing I could. But I can try to build something new, if you will let me." She looked down at her own hands, twisting them in the folds of her apron. "I do not know how." "Neither do I," he admitted, a wry, humorless smile touching his lips. "But I am willing to learn. I learned how to chop wood. I learned how to mend a fence. Perhaps I can learn how to be a husband, a father." He reached out, not to touch her, but holding his hand open, palm up. On it were his calluses, the broken blisters, the ingrained dirt. It was an offering, an admission of everything he had been and a promise of what he was trying to become. She stared at his hand for a long time. He could see the war within her, the deep, instinctual distrust battling with a flicker of something new, something fragile and hesitant. Hope. Slowly, as if it were the heaviest thing in the world, she lifted her own hand and lightly brushed her fingers against his. It was not a caress. It was a question, a test. His skin was rough against hers. Real. It was a start. In the weeks that followed, a new, fragile routine began to form. Alistair continued his work at the inn, his presence becoming a familiar, if still remarkable, sight in the village. He did not press Genevieve. He gave her space, but he was a constant, steady presence. His breakthrough with Rose came unexpectedly. He was sitting on the porch, attempting to repair a broken chair leg, when the little girl ventured out of the inn for the first time since her illness. She stood on the top step, watching him with his own gray eyes, her expression one of solemn curiosity. She was holding her little wooden robin. He did not speak to her, remembering Genevieve's warning that he was a stranger. He just continued his work, fumbling with a nail. He dropped it, and it rolled under the porch steps. He swore under his breath and started to get on his hands and knees to retrieve it. "I can get it," a small voice said. He looked up. Rose had come down the steps and was peering into the gap. She was small enough to reach. She lay on her tummy, her small arm disappearing into the darkness. A moment later she emerged, triumphant, the nail clutched in her grubby hand. She held it out to him. "Thank you, Rose," he said, his voice thick. She tilted her head. "How do you know my name?" "Your mother told me," he said gently. "It's a beautiful name. It's my mother's name, too." She seemed to consider this. "Do you have a bird?" she asked, holding up her robin. He was momentarily stumped. No, I don't." "Mama can make you one," she said with the simple certainty of a child. "She makes the best birds." "I know she does," he said softly. From that day on, Rose was no longer afraid of him. She would follow him as he worked, chattering away, asking 1,000 questions. He learned about her world, the best place to find ladybugs, the name of the grumpy cat that lived in the stables, the stories her mother told her at night. He listened, enthralled. Each small detail was a jewel, a piece of the life he had missed. He began to read to her in the evenings. Genevieve would sit nearby, mending clothes, her needle moving in steady, rhythmic stitches. She would not join the conversation, but she would listen. He would feel her gaze on him as he put on silly voices for the characters in a fairy tale, or explained a difficult word to Rose. The three of them, in the quiet, lamplit parlor of the inn, almost looked like a family. One evening, after he had tucked Rose into bed, he found Genevieve waiting for him in the hallway. She asked me today if you were her father, she said, her voice low. Alistair's heart stopped. What did you say? I told her the truth. I told her yes. He closed his eyes, leaning his head against the wall. Was she upset? She was happy, Genevieve admitted, a note of wonder in her voice. She said she had been hoping you were. She paused. She adores you. I do not deserve it, he whispered, his own failings feeling sharp and fresh in that moment. No, Genevieve agreed, her honesty as clean and sharp as ever. You do not. But she is a child. Her love is a gift. The question is what you will do with it. He opened his eyes and looked at her. In the dim light, she looked more like the Genevieve he remembered, but stronger, more sure of herself. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it, of her, of you. He had to return to Blackwood. The matter of his aunt had to be settled for good. He dreaded leaving, feeling as though the fragile trust he had built would evaporate the moment he was gone. He told Genevieve his plans, standing with her by the kitchen garden. I will be gone a week. No more. Davies has prepared everything. It is a simple matter of having her removed. She nodded, her gaze on the distant hills. It is your home. You must put it in order. It is our home, he corrected gently. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. He had sent his man to fetch it from Blackwood. From it, he took the Blackwood sapphires. They glittered in the afternoon sun, a cold, brilliant blue. These belong to you, to the Duchess of Blackwood. She looked at the necklace, her expression unreadable. For a moment he thought she would refuse, that she would see it as an attempt to buy her forgiveness. Instead, she reached out and took the necklace from his palm. She did not put it on. She simply held it, its weight seeming to anchor her. When you cast me out, I left this behind because it was a symbol of a life that had become a prison, she said, her voice quiet but clear. I was the Duchess of Blackwood, and I was powerless. I became Jane Smith, and I learned how to be strong. I learned how to survive. I learned how to be a mother. She looked up at him, her blue eyes meeting his. I will not go back to being the woman I was. I will not be a fragile creature managed by others. I would never ask you to, he said fervently. That woman is gone because I destroyed her. But the woman who stands before me, she is the one I want by my side, as my partner, as my equal, as the true Duchess of Blackwood, stronger and wiser than any of her predecessors. He held his breath. She looked down at the sapphires in her hand, then back at him. A slow smile, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in 7 years, touched her lips. It was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then you had better have the house in order when we arrive, Your Grace, she said. I have some ideas for a new school in the village, and the tenant farms are in a dreadful state. We will have much to do. He felt a laugh bubble up from his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He had not won back the past. He had, by some miracle, been granted a future. When Alistair returned to Blackwood Manor, it felt like a mausoleum. The silence was heavy, oppressive. He found his aunt in the main drawing room, arranging flowers as if she owned the place. She greeted him with a triumphant smile. Alistair, you are back. I trust you have put that unfortunate business to rest. I have, he said, his voice flat and cold. Mr. Davies stepped into the room behind him, holding a portfolio of documents. Lady Eleanor's smile faltered. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. In a calm, methodical tone, he laid out her treachery, her lies, her conspiracy. He spoke of the forgeries, the bribes, the poison disguised as medicine. With every sentence, the color drained from her face. You are a viper, aunt, he finished, his voice like ice. You have poisoned my life and my home for the last time. You will be out of this house within the hour. A carriage will take you to a small remote property I own in the north. You will be given a modest allowance, enough to live. You will have no contact with society. You will have no contact with me. If you attempt to defy this, I will turn Mr. Davis's evidence over to the authorities. You will end your days in prison. She stared at him, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. You would choose that creature over your own family? She is my family, Alistair said. She is my wife and the mother of my heir. You are nothing but a bitter, grasping relation I have indulged for far too long. Now get out of my sight. He turned his back on her and walked out of the room, leaving Davies to oversee her departure. He did not look back. He went to the nursery, the one that had been prepared and then shuttered 7 years ago. He threw open the windows, letting the fresh air pour in, chasing out the stale scent of sorrow and regret. A week later, a simple carriage, not the grand ducal coach, rolled up the drive to Blackwood Manor. Alistair was waiting on the steps. Genevieve stepped out first. She was wearing a simple traveling dress, but she wore it with an air of quiet authority. She was not the timid girl who had left this house in shame. She was its mistress, returning on her own terms. Then Rose tumbled out after her, her eyes wide as she took in the immense scale of the house. "Is this your castle?" she breathed, looking at Alistair. "It is our home," he said, smiling as he swung her up into his arms. He looked over Rose's head at Genevieve. She was looking at the house, not with fear or pain, but with a calm, appraising eye. Her gaze met his, and in it he saw not the ghost of the past, but the steady, hopeful light of a new beginning. That night, the great house was not silent. It was filled with the sound of a child's laughter echoing down the long corridors. After Rose was asleep in her new room, a small wooden robin on her nightstand, Alistair found Genevieve by the fire in their shared drawing room. The Blackwood sapphires lay on the mantelpiece, not a yoke, but a reclaimed piece of her history. She was sketching in a notebook, a design for a schoolhouse. He sat not opposite her, but beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a long time they were silent, the only sound the crackle of the fire. It was a comfortable silence, not an empty one. "It feels different," she said, her voice soft. "The house, it is different," he replied, "because you are here. We are here." He had spent 7 years in a gilded cage of his own making, filled with regret. She had spent 7 years in a crucible, forging a new strength. They were not the same people who had been torn apart by lies. They had been broken, and in the breaking they had been remade, stronger, wiser, together. The maid had stayed for 7 years, and in doing so, she had saved them all.